thanks for coming on the line with me today.
Oh, what a pleasure to finally be on here with you.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks for coming on. And look, I've been searching and seeking out cryptocurrency content and just trying to learn as much as I can about it. And I've come across your stuff now a number of times, and you're producing great content. And so thanks for what you're doing. Now, I want to touch on what's been going on in the last 24 hours here. Bitcoin, less than 24 hours ago, was 2250, 2260. And it has spiked over $2,600 here for a short period of time. I think we're a little under that now. But it's because of this BIP 91 successfully front-running BIP 148, the vote here. And the lock-in period now is going to take place. So let's get your initial thoughts on this. Maybe you can give us a little of an understanding of what's going on through your eyes here.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we're about 7 hours away from my last calculation just a few minutes ago from activating and actually locking in Segwit. Then it'll be about a 2-day period to officially activate it, and then a 2-week period. So, well, there's been a lot of fear and doubt, obviously, in the space surrounding it, because there's the possibility that there will be multiple Bitcoin. And I'm not just talking about the possibility that there could be 2 Bitcoin in the event of a hard fork, which everyone is scared of on August 1st, which is really a fear that people have if this one that is about to get locked in, the BP91, the Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, that's what the BIPs are, 91, if that doesn't get passed, then there's likelihood that there could be a hard fork on August 1st. However, it looks like about 82%, they only need 80% of the mining hash power for the last 1,000 blocks to be enabled for that, to be locked in for that. And so it seems like we're not going to have a hard fork, but we will, because of the way that the 91 works, the BIP 91 works. We're expected to have a hard fork probably in late November or early December, as is coded and expected. However, most are anticipating that the economic majority are not going to want a hard fork and to risk the possibility of having 2 different chains competing with each other. Because if you were around during Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, you saw how Ethereum Classic had pretty much no hash power, very little hash power. And overnight, one night, the exchange Polny added Ethereum Classic. I happened to be up that night around 3 in the morning. Most people were asleep. They didn't put out any sort of post to say they were going to do this. And it created the most confusion you can imagine. So it was almost like a black swan. And so what's interesting is that we can actually see this black swan ahead, and so nobody wants more than 1 Bitcoin. However, it's likely that we'll see different versions of Bitcoin. You're going to hear about Bitcoin Cash now coming out, Bitcoin ABC, Bitmain, one of the main hardware producers for Bitcoin mining equipment. They have kind of a controversy going on from back in the day. Probably a few months ago during the ASIC boost controversy, where it was seen that the hardware they were producing, and they produced most of the hardware to mine Bitcoin with, gave about a 20% increase or more to certain people who were running this hardware. However, it wasn't proven that they had this technology inside of their chips. However, if a certain fork happens, it might disable that ASIC boost technology permanently, which would take away from the income, obviously, of the people who are running this ASIC boost if they're actually running it. So Bitmain, I believe, has said that regardless of what happens, they are going to be making their own Bitcoin come out August 4th, actually. I'm not sure if you heard about that, Ken.
No, I actually haven't heard about it, but I have now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard there could be a potential for up to 6 different Bitcoin between now and November. Assuming, firstly, that this one doesn't get locked in, but it looks like it will. So the most I can see right now in the not too distant future is probably 3. But that's why, as you know very well, to hold your private keys, hold your Bitcoin, keep them off an exchange, and then you don't have to worry because you will get all 6 Bitcoin. And I'm almost positive 1 will be the surviving one.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. So are people just going to ignore the ones that are new, and do you see them sticking with what we know as this Bitcoin core?
Now that's the tricky thing. It's really hard to say, because if there are more than one Bitcoin, then there is a debate. Which one is the real Bitcoin? And then what is beautiful about Bitcoin is that besides the fact we don't know who created it, Satoshi, it's that there's only 21 million that will ever exist by the year 2140. And so if you split it and you fork it, so now which one is the real Bitcoin? They both have the same history. They might have similar upgrades. It becomes really, really confusing when now instead of having 21, you have 42 million Bitcoin or even more out there technically. And you're going to hear a lot of arguments. So I think the brightest minds are actually going to avoid a hard fork. In my opinion, we're not going to see more than one Bitcoin. It's very, very unlikely. What we'll probably see is that this will get locked in, Segwit will pass, block out any other upgrades, the user-activated soft fork, which would force Segwit to happen. It doesn't have to happen, the user-activated soft fork, if we lock in this BIP 91 that we're going through right now. So I'm of the utmost belief that Segwit will pass. However, the hard fork is going to be so contentious that even though you had some of the biggest companies agree in New York, the New York Agreement, where they all met up and they said, we are going to create a compromise. We are going to do Segwit first, because I've been around, honestly, since 2014, 15, when I first started holding it, holding on for dear life my Bitcoin. I was using it for transactional purposes beforehand, and Bitcoin has had this scaling debate going on for years. There was Bitcoin Classic, which was going to be double the amount of transaction size per block, so 2 megabyte blocks versus 1 megabyte block. Bitcoin Unlimited started coming out at that point. You've probably heard about it recently. So this has gone on for years. So I am extremely excited today, honestly, that this is finally going to get solved. And Segwit is something that's necessary. We need to fix double spending issues. We need to be able to increase somewhat for now. I do think ultimately we will probably need some sort of hard fork in order to enable the bigger blocks. I can't say if we're going to need it now or within the next 3 years. However, Segwit is a major upgrade. And even though I've wanted bigger blocks, I understand the compromise that they did in New York, which was people like Coinbase, Polny agreeing that they are going to activate Segwit, which is what's happening right now, and then in 3 months' time, hard fork, and then increase to between 2 and 8 megabyte blocks. They haven't settled that as far as I know. And what I expect is going to happen is that by that point, you're going to see that there's going to be two sides. There's going to be the side that believes, you know, it's right, you said that you were going to do this, and you were going to hard forks, you should hard fork, and the companies that agreed to do it are going to be kind of in the middle. And then you're going to have the group that says you should never hard fork. It's going to create more confusion, just like we're seeing now. And ultimately, I think that's the side that's going to win out. So it's almost like a waiting game. It's almost like playing chicken.
Yeah.
And ultimately, yeah, nobody wants to lose out here. Everybody just wants to make the most money. Nobody wants to create confusion within Bitcoin. So that's why we're seeing the pressure to do this, what's happening right now. And come November, it's probably going to happen again, but I think it's an awesome buying opportunity right now for that very reason.
Okay, Omar. So are we, in your opinion, seeing an injection of confidence into Bitcoin at the moment? And is this because we're seeing some solutions to the scaling issue, which has been a problem for, you know, a while, very long time now? And I guess I have some follow-up questions to that we can touch on. But, you know, if we do have some solutions to these scaling issues, that's lower transaction fees for Bitcoin. And then that has implications on all the altcoins, which benefited from all of Bitcoin's problems, right? So kind of touch on that as you will, and we can try to go back and forth to extrapolate it.
Well, you're absolutely right. I actually was what you would call a Bitcoin maximalist at first. Everybody knows me as an Ethereum fanboy now, apparently. But I heard about Ethereum actually on Instagram.
Tell people what that means. Tell me what that means.
Well, a maximalist is a person who believes that this is the one true coin and they really can't see anything else surviving. there was an interview that Adam Meister had yesterday with Simon Dixon on there, where he said if Bitcoin fails, all of blockchain fails and we have to start over. Now, I don't necessarily believe that anymore, but that's you're going to see the different camps. You're going to be the conservative, the extreme conservative Bitcoin people who believe that Satoshi's dream, Bitcoin, it's almost like a Bible. You read the white paper and you interpret it. Some people interpret it differently, saying that he always wanted it to stay with smaller blocks, and some people, in order to allow it to be more distributed, you allow more people to use hardware to mine all around the world, because if you have bigger blocks, you're going to need more specialized hardware. Now, some people say Satoshi did this on purpose, and he even pointed out Moore's law, which was created by Intel, by Mr. Moore, Gordon Moore, who worked for Intel, who kind of set the roadmap for technology, which is kind of been the roadmap for my own channel, which is looking at kind of the issues with our old economic surroundings, which has a lot of problems, I think, that you always point out in your channel. So I suppose your viewers probably are familiar with that. And then looking at the singularity, which is this point in the future where technology advances because 5 years, technology doubles in speed and halves in costs. So the best way I look at that is by going to newegg.com. I'm part of their newsletter, and I look at the prices of solid state hard drives, for example. And when they first came out, they were extreme. They were like $250 for a 60 gigabyte solid state drive. Now I can get a 512 gigabyte solid state drive not too long after that for only $120, which is, to me, that's been my marker. And what you're seeing is that eventually chips and technology are going to get so small that we can cram them anywhere, in walls, inside of our clothing, so that we can, for example, wear this article of clothing and it knows what temperature we like to be in this. For example, if it's summer, it would just be a smart sweater, and it would cost nothing. It would cost pennies by this point. So highly recommend you check out Ray Kurzweil's work. He created the first keyboard synthesizer. He created the first text-to-speech software. He's kind of a genius. And Michio Kaku, he's a physicist. He has great books on physics of the future. Is a great book, for example, where he goes into this. You touch your wallpaper and you can change it to red on your wall, and it'll just be the fabric of our existence. And so nothing, despite economic turbulences, has been able to slow down the graph. If you look at the adoption and the rate of increase of this technology of 1.5 times speed, every 1.5 years, it doubles in speed and halves in price, which has been Silicon Valley's roadmap. We have to do this, if not our competitor will do it. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, it slowed down recently. There are arguments against it being as fast as was expected before, but they're actually finding ways to keep it moving. Believe it or not, they're evolving new ways to keep it moving. But, this got me thinking, what is going to be always in my life, the next Internet of Things? What is going to be that IoT, that very fabric that controls everything around us? What is going to do it? And so I started investing in companies like Microsoft. I bought Intel stock back in the day. And I eventually started holding Bitcoin. And I didn't want to hear anything about any other coins, but eventually I got so frustrated with the debate that kept going on. And if you look on the message boards, if you look within the community, just look up videos, it's almost a hostility, all this wasted energy in fighting instead of building. And so I heard about Ethereum, and then I heard it again. And I'm a believer that if you hear something twice, you should at least give it a look, You might dismiss it the first time. But if, maybe the universe is trying to tell you something. So I looked at Ethereum, and I began to realize, and this was around when it was $8 a coin, and I was thinking, what they're doing could very well be this Internet of Things that I see in the future. You have smart contracts, little chips and nodes inside of everything that run on the Ethereum network, paying each other through microtransactions, interacting autonomously or not, and in a decentralized fashion. And so that's the future that I see Ethereum heading toward as it continues to progress down its roadmap. It still has a ways to go, of course, but the developers, like you might look at teams, for example. And to me, when I invest in any project, I always look at the team. I look at the people. I feel their spirit. I don't know. I'm pretty good at gauging character. I can almost feel a person. You know, you can tell when somebody's not trying to just give you information and they're trying to take something from you. I don't know. It's obvious. And so I looked at Vitalik, and I looked at Dr. Gavin Wood, and I looked at a lot of the community around it. And I would go to the forums for Bitcoin and just find fighting, and it should be this and be this, and this guy knows what's up, Greg Maxwell this, Core, Blockstream, and I'm just like, I was getting drained. And then I went to the Ethereum message boards, and it would just be talking about this technology and what's going to happen and what is going to be possible now. And that was way before all these other ICOs and blockchains. And so I just became very enamored with looking up a lot of information for it. But yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. Because of Bitcoin's troubles, that's what led me to Ethereum. And I think a lot of other people. So it'll be really, really interesting to see now that Bitcoin is solving at least one part of its scaling debate, it's not over, how the markets will react to it. But other monsters have been unleashed, let's just say, already.
I think that's what I was just about to say. Other monsters have been unleashed, and especially over the last few months here, Ethereum and Dash and Litecoin moving up, and just some of these other ones, Veritasium. Oh my gosh, right? What a game changer it would have been if, I mean, you know, I wish I put just even a couple grand in that when it came out, and boom, I would have had a serious return on my money. Okay, so let's talk about some of these ICOs, because I want to educate the audience a little bit on what's going on here. It's a huge ICO craze right now. Many are calling it a bubble. Companies are raising enormous amounts of cash in these ICOs. I mean, we've seen some very successful ones. Golem raised, what, $8 million in a few minutes or something crazy. And what's interesting, though, is these ICOs are being compared to IPOs. But the difference between them is that in an ICO, you're getting a coin, and in an IPO, you're actually getting exchange of equity in an actual company. And so I guess I want to just differentiate with these companies that are actually real companies that want to produce revenue and sell a product, and then they go over and they use a form of a currency to issue that, but then the currency isn't really tied to the product themselves, as opposed to, let's say, an ICO where you get the currency and you trade it and you speculate with it, and people are interested in the currency itself, but not necessarily the underlying business behind the token. So a little bit convoluted there, and maybe you can clear up a little of even my own question there.
It's interesting how it's evolved so fast. I remember the first ICO I got into was Digix Global. I believe it was around last April. And time flies. That was April 2016. And it was so simple back then. But now it's almost, if you could tokenize something, if you could come up with something right now and know that you'll make $8 million, Kenneth, if you could say anything, any idea you think of, and if you had the programming language, I mean, who wouldn't, right? So that's what we're seeing right now. It's a cash grab, and they're taking advantage of the fact that, you're right, people do not know what a regular IPO is, and the fact that they have to produce statements and they have to have some sort of regulation from the regular markets in order to protect investors. So you're not seeing any sort of protection. These ICOs are making promises. They're getting money from ideas. They're getting money from writing a nice paper. But we don't really know what they're going to do. There are different types of coins, like you mentioned. Some are actually used on the platform. For example, are using a gambling token. So instead of getting dividends, because that is technically illegal in the United States for you to do without regulation, what they're doing is they did an ICO for the token that is actually used to gamble on the platform. So that's actually a used token that eventually goes to a smart contract that could be burned or used for marketing. So that in a way negates that. However, there are tokens that are completely speculative that have shouldn't have any value. I mean, Bancor, for example, they recently had an ICO, and disclaimer, I have Bancor, but I'm not saying they're holy. I'll say I'll talk about coins that I'm not even holding as well in a positive light. However, Bancor has the ability, and it's been found on the code, proven by some of the biggest minds that can read the language, that they can create or destroy tokens in anyone's wallet at any point. They said eventually the response from the Bancor team was that it's almost like training wheels. So as things stabilize, they'll remove themselves from it. However, we're seeing a lot of centralization in that, and the fact that people are taking advantage of it because they don't realize these things. They're not looking at economics. They're not realizing that, for example, with Veritasium, Reggie Middleton is holding 98%, or Veritasium, the company, 98% of those tokens. So there's very little supply out there, just over 1 million. However, I mean, you could have 99 million if he decided to sell tomorrow. So there's a lot of risk there that people need to be aware of. So what we're seeing now that is actually really interesting, and I think exciting for me to see, is you're seeing companies like Consensus, which is a company headquartered in New York that creates decentralized applications over Ethereum, helps educate about the language, does meetings everywhere. And what they're doing is they just released, I remember reading a news article that they released Consensus Capital. So they're creating an almost framework in order to, to better judge these ICOs, to look at them a little cleaner and then provide detailed reports to future investors. And so I imagine in the future, we're probably going to have a major crash and burn like the Dow again. You're going to have some people lose, probably, it's almost terrible to say, but it's the reality of it is that people do not learn until they lose some money. You go and you try to so they try to trade some cryptocurrencies, they lose money, and then you realize you're better off just investing and holding. So what's probably going to happen is an ICO loses $200 million like the Dow, and that causes the market to crash for a while, and then people learn, and then they demand this kind of ICO review. You're going to see different companies continue to come out. ICO Alert, Veritasium themselves are doing reports for different cryptocurrencies. So Veritasium works in the way that you can actually send a Veritasium token over to Veritasium, the company, and they will produce a report for you about whatever coin that actually has readable statistics and charts and future projections and things that people should really be looking at besides a nice mission statement and white paper. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these ICOs are fulfilling what they need to do, but when you get $120 million up front, and there are very few people that can actually code this language, so you can't really hire too many people, and you have very limited time yourself to develop. And there's only so much marketing these people do, from my experience. They're not very adept at marketing or graphical user interface yet. But my point is, you don't need that much money for what they're trying to do. No regular startup in an IPO gets that kind of money for these kind of projects. So I think it's some greed.
Let me. So we can, if in theory, we can start our own token today or tomorrow, and we can make it 100% currency. There is no business behind it. It's just something based on the blockchain. We have a ledger, and there's no business behind it, and have our own ICO and initial coin offering and issue it, and it just trades. But then there's other companies that are doing the same thing, but saying that they have an idea behind it, some sort of revenue stream, some sort of business, and they're using it as like a Kickstarter, but there is no real backing of the token with that company. It's just some marketing story to pitch the token, so people give them money, and then that's it. Because if the token does good, I guess the company who started it owns it and will make more money and can use it towards their own business, but it doesn't necessarily help the people who bought the token, the success of the underlying company.
It's terrible. I get emails almost every day, probably 3 or 4 emails offering me lots of money to talk about different ICOs. And 99% of the time, I completely refuse to do it. And whenever I do, obviously, I tell the people on my channel. However, I refuse to take part of this because, like I said, I believe in the team, and that's what everybody should look at. Dig a little deeper than just the surface, and you might find, and this has actually happened, fraudulent universities added to LinkedIn profiles, or LinkedIn profiles that aren't very, very old. You're going to find a lot of grittiness. And so if you're going to invest in ICO, I think it's important to look at their history. One that I recently did was called Zype, and this was a gentleman who was raising money for films. So this token grants you producer credits, it grants you access to different events, and so he's having an ICO, and I looked at his history on IMDb, and he had countless films. He's a producer. You know, he's not going to have this blemish on his reputation. He created a coin and scammed a lot of people. He doesn't need to. He was in the Rogue One Star Wars movie. I think it's important to look at intention, and you're absolutely right. But I think we're going to get a correction when the markets do crash in a big way. What you're going to see is that a lot of these tokens that promise but haven't delivered yet are going to probably suffer greatly. I'm not going to say they're going to die, because it's almost impossible when you can trade on decentralized exchanges like either Delta, because you could, Kenneth, create your own coin and not have to go to a major exchange like Bittrex or Poloniex. You could put it up on either Delta and give everyone the smart contract address, and it could trade, and your token could be worthless. You could create a token, for example, 1,000 tokens, and each of these tokens would be worth 1 hour of your time. And Kenneth, maybe an interview or something like that. And you could put that up for sale and people could trade that. And then that would be the value of the Kenneth token, for example. There's I have a friend of mine, actually Griff Green, and he believes that that is going to be the future. We're each going to tokenize our own value. He's mentioned that to me. At least that's one philosophy he's mentioned, in which there is an Omar token, there is a Kenneth token, and so we trade using a trust line kind of system for each other's time in a true value network, or
like a decentralized.
Yeah, where we actually have money. Yeah, which is a really neat idea. I can't say I've explored it enough, but it's an interesting way to look at it. So you could totally do that right now if you had the knowledge. Now, the coins, you're right, that are going to be probably the biggest money raising, or the ones that people actually want to hold, are going to be coins that do produce dividends, have a real business plan. They're burned, for example, and they have utility. I do believe that, but we're not even close to that yet. This is just starting, Kenneth.
Yeah, it is amazing, and the more I learn about it, the more I see the potential for where this can go. So I want to ask you, okay, so the blockchain itself, can we separate the monetary component of these tokens and essentially take away the token aspect of it and just use the blockchain, and where people aren't trading it and speculating and running the price up, but using it to track, let's say, title of real estate as the ledger that is created when we use a blockchain? But does it always have to be associated with some token that gets traded on an exchange and goes up and down in price?
No, absolutely not. You're seeing that in other countries. I believe Dubai is doing a smart city. You're seeing smart cities now spring up around the world. And so I'm sure you're going to see real estate traded. You're going to see names attached to them, and they're going to be placed on the blockchain just for that reason, because ultimately what the blockchain is, it's just a database. It's just storing information in a decentralized way across multiple computers, each agreeing that this is the correct database over time. That's all it is. So yeah, you'll see that Mary bought a house on this date on the blockchain, and there doesn't need to be a token traded for that. That's almost blatantly obvious. However, you're going to see that people want to monetize as much as they can. So honestly, I think the most altruistic projects are going to be the ones that are going to succeed, in my vision of the future, because we all have our own vision, right? Some people think there's going to be a Fed coin or the dollar coin that is going to be the centralized currency, and Bitcoin will be our savings account, or EOS will take over, and they'll have really easy smart contract templates. So everybody's creating decentralized applications over the EOS network, which is extremely fast. Is projected to be extremely fast, created by the gentleman who created BitShares, Dan Larimer, and Steemit, that do work extremely fast. But in my vision of the future, we're going to see is that platforms, the smart contracts, the dApps, the ICOs that actually live into the future, the ones that are most altruistic and do not have any sort of coin that benefits a certain group of individuals who got into the ICO or who are holding the most of a coin. But it's actually peer-to-peer. You know what I mean? There's nothing in the middle. There's no token that I have to buy into. I can just send you Ether. Why should I have to buy this token and send you something else? The projects that are completely cutting out the middleman, that is exactly what the vision is about. And we see very few projects out there. Giveth is one, a charity platform that is surprising to me because it doesn't have any of that sort of revenue stream for anyone in particular. But you have to put up, for example, $5, and then you expect everyone else who's going to contribute to put in $5. And only then, when it's in escrow, your money and all the escrow money all the money they put in escrow, then can you hit go and distribute that to whatever charity you decide. But you're investing your own money, so that's altruistic. I decided I want to put up money for this charity. There's nobody taking a cut anyway. I'm not taking any sort of cut as a charity creator, and neither is everybody else who's putting some money in and getting 10%. Now, it's hard to grasp that concept when we do tend to think very capitalistic, but ultimately, this is almost a revealing of truth, which is almost what you do on this channel. You're exposing the corruption. You're exposing what we might not be aware of if we just watch mainstream television. And so what you're going to see is truth. And what is the opposite of greed? Is probably altruism. The opposite of some sort of token that allows me to empower myself and solely myself selfishly, but instead just kind of create an economy where we all contribute and we have an economy of value is what I call it. So how much value do I put into this ecosystem, this blockchain? For example, I make videos or I make blog posts on Steemit. That's what I do. And so I get to make most of my money through cryptocurrency. It's extremely rewarding and freeing to know that I'm already part of this economy. I make probably more money on Steemit, and thank you everybody who follows me there, than I do on YouTube. I do YouTube because I'm just happy to be part of the legacy that's happening and to pass that knowledge forward. But you know as well as anybody else that YouTube isn't real. Google's taking a lot of that money. And the moment that someone makes a decentralized YouTube, which I can tell you probably 10 different projects that are working on it as we speak, that will disappear very, very quickly when it can get interplanetary file storage and BitTorrent to all work with storing data in data ways that will not disappear and transfer. And if, for example, you could pay somebody 0.0001 Ether for watching each second of your video. So it might not cost the viewer very much at all. But that hasn't been possible with traditional financial systems. PayPal charges something like 30% per transaction. I think you know that as well. Maybe I heard that here. 30% per transaction. So you can't do that. You cannot charge micropayments.
Charges 30% per transaction?
Oh, 30 cents.
Oh, 30 cents.
That's like the lowest. Yeah. So you can't charge 5 cents.
Okay.
Sorry?
So if you're transacting with like $1, but it's obviously goes higher than that if you're transacting. It's lower if you send more money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it doesn't go any lower than that. You can't charge a penny, which has it's amazing, but it's never been possible. And now, because of Segwit finally about to be locked into Bitcoin, many are saying that's going to make it easy for the Lightning Network. That is going to enable things like rootstock and micropayments like the ones I just talked about on the Bitcoin network to exist. This is huge in ways we can't even imagine, when you can actually scale massively, have a huge amount of users, because instead of everybody trying to access the blockchain at the same time, the same blocks, we create a channel. We create what's called like a state channel. So we do everything right here in this space, and then we plug it in. And so you don't have to use as much space in order to fill the block with stuff. And so you can now scale this massively and not exhaust the Bitcoin network with what's going to be created in the next couple of years. I'm extremely excited to see what these developers, I'm not anything compared, those are the guys doing the hard work. They deserve all the praise. But what they're about to do is really, really about to disrupt in ways that we we still can't really imagine or haven't imagined yet.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, and I completely 100% agree with you. And I guess what I was feeling in this interview is ignorance is going to be detrimental for people going forward if you don't take some time to learn about this, because this is just going to get embedded into so many aspects of our daily life, and it can be real estate, insurance, and how you buy a car.
It's amazing.
Transact.
You're absolutely right. It's an evolution of the fittest. It's been like that through all of the known universe. I mean, it's Darwinism in a way. You either start to learn, you just start. The first time you hear about, what is it? You hear about Bitcoin, then a few months go by, then maybe you buy a little bit of Bitcoin, or you finally get your account created, then more time goes by, then you get verified. But it takes a while for the average person to actually put a substantial amount into Bitcoin. But the best thing you can do, especially if you're watching Kent's channel and you haven't invested yet, is just to get some. And you will lose money if you try to trade. But I think that's an important part of it, is to just dive in. You're not going to learn by reading a book. There are books being created out there, but that's not the way to do this. This is experience. We're radically changing the ways that our brains are programmed and have been programmed for years towards something that we still haven't created. Like we're trying to be ahead of the curve right now, and this is an opportunity to be part of the next adaptation for the human mind, because I think evolution physically might have slowed down, but mentally it's almost speeding up, is what I'm noticing, which is really interesting. And you're absolutely right. You put it right on the nail there when you said it's survival of the fittest, and unfortunately some people will financially suffer. It might not be easy for them during the transition, and they'll either stay in the same place they are now or maybe regress a little bit. But this is the opportunity you have right now to prosper greatly. It's really early.
Yeah. Wow. There's going to be a lot for people to digest in this interview today. Omar, I want to thank you for coming on the show with me.